Hi, and welcome to our Capital Connect podcast for today. Today I'm joined with Andrew Speers, who's the founding partner of SoHi Partners. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
Now, I'm very excited for this conversation because if anyone knows the sort of background of Wholesale Investor, we've been working with life science companies and in the life science area since 2009. So when I was introduced to you sort of post, our emergence conference, I was fascinated by what you're doing, fascinated by the team that you've been able to get around you, and in general, your investment thesis. Now, already had the pleasure to hear that, but in this sort of conversation, I'd love to at least start with a bit of a background as to the team behind SoHi Partners.
Sure. So SoHi Partners, little side note, interestingly stands for Southern Highlands Partners. So we're all based in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, where we work, where we live, where we're active members of that community. And, part of that community spirit that we had was, over some cheese and wine one day, surgeons, bankers, professionals who kind of live out there, we were having a bit of an event and we were having a talk about how do we create more innovation in the Australian economy. There was a genuine view that private industry and private individuals need to drive and foster more innovation in an almost philanthropical way. And we came up with this view that SoHi Partners, a venture capital firm that supports medical innovation in life sciences, biotech, medtech, medical devices, therapeutics, and other areas, was a really core focus area of importance, not just to Australia, but to benefit the world. And we were having this conversation, as I said, over cheese and wine, and it just basically turned into a business, really pushed by the two surgical founders in the business, Dr. Nicholas Hartnell, Dr. Ashish Dhawan, who between them have 40 patents for inventions that they've created and have observed that the Australian venture capital industry isn't where the rest of the world is, particularly the United States and Europe. So they wanted to change that as insiders solving problems. And now they're taking that experience, very broad, deep experience as innovators, inventors, users of technology, educators of technology, and now venture capitalists to help shape the future of medicine and life sciences around the world. So our core mantra is that we have to invest in a problem that is global and is a significant problem for the world. So we're not going to invest in things like cosmetics and cosmetic surgeries or any of those sort of therapeutics. We're going for back pain, spinal disformations, knee injuries, brain injuries. We're going for the big ticket issues that are going to make a huge difference around the world.
So give us some sort of perspective, because what I found personally interesting is how you're bringing together that combination of real life surgical expertise. The guys are still practicing, still in surgery, probably today, as well as well as that banking, investment banking, and just general business experience. Just explain how you sort of brought that together for this as a fund, and then how you see that overlaying with some of the companies that you'll be investing into.
Yeah, so as a side note, we've just successfully closed the first round of the fund. That round was oversubscribed and we're really happy around that. 80% of the investors in that first round were actually surgeons, doctors, medical professionals. The reason they invested in us is basically what you said there. It's about how we brought the world of surgery, medicine, and life sciences around the investment community. So what we formed was a different way of looking at VC and looking at investments. We have created something called the Medical Advisory Panel, and you need to effectively think of that as a peer review body, which is completely independent from the investment committee. So every opportunity gets filtered through the Medical Advisory Panel, which is co-chaired by Dr. Nicholas Hartnell and Dr. Ashish Dhawan. We then bring into that panel other subject matter experts. So it could be a regulatory lawyer who has deep experience in the regulatory path for a class 3 medical device in the United States for FDA approval, or patent marking in Europe, or the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia. So they'll look at that as an independent group of experts who understand the science, understand the technology. It's not their first rodeo from a raise or an approvals perspective. So they know the path to get to market. and their users as well.
Yes.
And that's why it's very important to us that the people within that panel stay surgeons and stay on the tools, because we need them understanding what the current market landscape is. And so then an idea will come into that medical advisory panel and they'll look at it and they'll say, this is a fantastic idea. We've looked at the science, and we'll typically look at things after they've maybe had a very successful in vitro trial or a very successful animal trial where we've got enough proof and data points that the surgeons can look at it and say, it's gone through 4 animal trials, it's been successful, we believe this will equate to a human trial approval, and the regulatory path is A, B, C, and D that they need to go through, and we understand that, we understand the science. And what that's really about is, I think the problem that a lot of investors have in life science and medtech is that they don't understand it. And they think that the people presenting the ideas to them are subject matter experts. And quite often, there's a lot of life science businesses that are started up by people outside of medicine and outside of science. And they can sell really well, but quite often they lack a lot of commercial experience and scientific experience to really get their idea off the ground, or even have an understanding of the science and the regulatory path. So that panel is invaluable to us. It's a time-consuming process, but it basically means that once something gets to the investment committee, we don't need to do any work around proving that the idea is viable. They've already said to us the science is valid and it works. It then passes over to the investment risk committee, and that's co-chaired by myself and our managing partner, Mr. John Bullwinkle. And we look at it from your typical VC perspective, where we'll say, what's the addressable market? What's the potential exit? What's the valuation? What's the management team and their capabilities and all of these sorts of things? And then we go into our legal DD process. So 3 triggers need to be pulled in order for us to put $1 into a business. Legal DD looks like, what clauses are we putting in the term sheet and the investment documents to ensure that we can, have a 1x liquidity exit before founders, and, are we considering warrant structures and options within that as well? So we have 3 independent processes before we'll put an investor's dollar out the door. And that gives all the people that have invested into us, a lot of comfort that we're not taking bets on things that we don't understand. And it is a truly viable medicine, device, procedure, backed by solid investment considerations and good legal structuring.
It's an interesting approach, because if you think about the traditional VC pathway, it's more, here is our thesis, here's our investment thesis, here is where we think the market is going. Let's basically raise funds for that, and then let's then attract, basically attract opportunities which may fit that thesis, and then try and identify the sort of best opportunities. Whereas yours is almost like the bottom-up approach. And I find it interesting, one of the things I always talk about with people is life science is, at the end of the day, life science can come down to being a very personal investment for a lot of high net worths as far as and family offices as far as what they typically back. And it's interesting how you've taken a strategic, I suppose, a systematic approach to that, in that you're dealing with the surgeons that are, as you said rightly, on the tools, literally, understanding. And I imagine the reason the surgeons, investors, they all understand this as a problem. Like, they would understand the challenge that their patients would, are basically probably what they're seeing more of at different times. And then they can then provide those opportunities up to the investment community, which I think is a very interesting approach.
Yeah, look, I mean, scientists and doctors and surgeons, they're used to a peer review process, and that's been put in place over centuries, because you don't want a medicine or a device getting to market unless it's absolutely 100% going to work. And we think the same thing, based on how we've structured ourselves, that we don't want to invest into something unless we're 100% sure it's going to be successful. And you're absolutely right, our approach is a little bit different, but I think what that's coming from is we're observing, and as is everybody, it's tough to raise capital in this market, right? So what investors are looking at is, what's a particular niche? How well does that business understand its niche? And how are they using my capital effectively? So there's no appetite for family offices and wholesale investors at the moment to take punts on things, because capital is scarce. So they want to know that if they're putting $1 to work, it's actually going to work and it's not going to be wasted. So we're getting a lot of support from that network around our structure.
Interesting. And when you think about like some of the, I suppose to give some sort of perspective, what are some of the companies which are coming across your desk now that have been sort of fed up through the process?
Yeah, look, we probably get close to 100 opportunities hitting the inbox a month.
Just to give context to that, like I know that you'd be getting that because I get very, very similar. If people want to understand the need for, and you straight away started out the need for more capital going into Australians' life. Australia has an incredible history of life science and medical technology innovation, and ultimately a lot of the companies end up going overseas to get their capital because really in Australia there's probably less than a handful of actually venture investors that typically invest into this space. So to give some perspective about the opportunity that you're taking on, to have over 100 be coming in a month and know that the competition from a capital perspective in known VCs is typically 5. And I know in this space, if typically one rejects, the rest often may not look to move forward. Like I said, very few people understand how much opportunity there is for Australian life science. So it's interesting to know that amount is already coming into your inbox, and I imagine that will grow.
Yeah, look, and we're actually getting other VCs approaching us now as well, wanting to piggyback off what we're doing because there's a...
Are they in life sciences or outside?
Both, but typically it'll be a family office or another VC who wants to invest in something and they want our views on it. Particularly because we've got such a strong approach with the medical advisory panel. What we say to other VCs and family offices is, we can put it through the process for you, and if we like it, we'll co-invest with you. Because, not every VC has access to multiple surgeons and medical specialists, and you really need to know your space in life sciences if you're going to invest in it.
And so you highlighted the sort of bottom-up approach. What are some of the parameters you've put around your investment thesis and what you're looking to back?
Look, it's pretty broad. It just needs to be, it needs to be a total addressable market of at least $1 billion USD. The reason we say that is because it has to be a big problem in the world. That's our mantra. We have to be solving the world's biggest problems. And that sounds big, and it is big, and it's hard, but it's valuable and viable and sustainable once you make those investments. So, total addressable market of USD 1 billion, there has to be an ability for us to have manufacturing based out of Australia or regional Australia where we can. Strong preference for regional Australia, being Australia's, I think, one of only 2 regional Australian venture capital firms, and we believe certainly the only regional Australian investment bank. We want to make sure that we're supporting the regions of Australia outside the major capital cities. Look, and there's 2 degrees to that. It's not just altruistic, it's financial as well. The cost of manufacturing, the cost of labour, the cost of land and building is significantly cheaper in the regions than it is Australia's major cities. We all know about the housing crisis. We all know about the cost of warehouse space, freight and logistics costs, within the major cities. So there's some financial rationale around that as well. And then apart from that, it just needs to be, broadly within the medtech space. We'll invest into any business around the world. And, if you're just investing in medtech in Australia, you're missing out on, 98.5% of the world's opportunities. So we bring that global lens. For example, one of our first 4 investments was into New Zealand. We're looking at businesses in the United States. We're looking at businesses in Europe as well. So truly globally focused life science investments that are the biggest problems in the world. We've got a very free mandate with our investors in terms of what we can invest in, whether it be early stage or later stage. And we're also looking at some quite revolutionary for VC structures as well. So we'll make an investment into an early stage business. For example, we're looking at a collagen business. In fact, we're investing into it. They take kangaroo tendons and effectively dematerialize them back to base collagen. We'll then, potentially look at acquiring a more advanced collagen business who has the supply chains into all of the hospitals. They've got their insurance codings established, and then we'll roll the 2 together almost as a reverse takeover to accelerate the launch of the product once it passes FDA approval, which we believe it will.
Interesting. Funny, as you're talking, I've literally got sort of 3 different companies coming to mind that I want to provide introductions to. So the understanding that as a criteria, and those are some of your sort of parameters. When you're, I suppose, assessing the opportunities, and I suppose you can break this down from an investor's perspective, outside of having the sort of billion market, what sort of timeframes are you looking for as far as, what stage do they need to be at? What sort of timeframes as far as going through trials, path to exits? Are there any sort of, I suppose, special aspects that you're looking at?
Look, we want businesses that will return, 20 times plus capital, right? And you don't get those at the very late stage. So, we might make a late stage investment if we know that there's going to be an FDA approval very soon for a new product. We've reviewed the science, we've got the capital sitting in the bank, and it's a quick turn. But that's a bit of a punt for 5 to 6 times for us. We'll probably be much more comfortable looking at a business for major investment. They're early stage, they've proved the concept. And what we mean by that in medtech is, they've either had a very successful in vitro trial or very successful animal trial. And we've got that data point that the medical advisory panel can look at and review. But apart from that, that's really the comfort space. But we will look at other stuff later on. Yeah. And look, we've already looked at one business and, potentially investing into it that is below the USD 1 billion. But it's complementary to something else that we're already invested into. So we're flexible where we can see this product will add value to this product in the portfolio, but not necessarily compete against each other.
And if you're speaking to if you're speaking to a high net worth or to a family office that hasn't sort of previously invested into life science, how do you sort of educate them on, the typical timeframes of life science opportunities and why they should be looking at sort of participating in the fund?
Yeah, I mean, life science and healthcare has one of the highest exit multiples as an investment class globally. And particularly Asian Pacific life science businesses and healthcare businesses have one of the highest multiples as well. That's primarily driven around, it's the largest expanding market from a population perspective, Asia Pacific. So, there's a shortfall of medical professionals globally. World Health Organization talks about by 2030, there's going to be a 10 million shortfall globally in healthcare professionals. The vast majority of that's actually going to be in APAC. So, there is an aging and ailing population globally, and we're smack bang in the region where the problem is the biggest. So it's a market which is counter-cyclical, but interestingly growing at 2 to 3 times GDP.
Yes.
So it's a more stable investment, and it's in a very high growth market. And we're ultimately bringing a structure to that investment that is peer-reviewed, strong investment criteria, and sound legal structuring to assess the ventures into that counter-cyclical, higher growth investment market. And, interestingly, what we also say to investors is that the medtech industry at a large global player level, so if you look at your Strykers, if you look at your J&J, if you look at your Medtronics, if you look at your Thermo Fishers, they no longer have the deep innovation labs to create the next level of products. So that industry is built around acquiring.
It is.
So they really look to people like ourselves, and they're actually even starting to approach us to say, what's in your portfolio, what's coming up, what's a potential exit. And so we tell investors that's how the market works. And we explain to them that realistically, we would expect from an investment going in the door to a dollar coming out of that investment, a turnaround time somewhere between 3 to 5 years. And why we say that is because we don't necessarily want to sell as soon as it gets its FDA approval, which can take about 18 to 24 months. We like to get the track record in the door from a sales and a demand perspective to really get that multiple up to a point where a PE firm or a big corporate's going to buy it out. We like trade sales much better than we like floats. We think whilst you get a liquidity return going through a float, we think the best and easiest path to get a good return in VC is a trade sale.
Interesting, and that's that definitely has been proven in the Australian ecosystem with some of the more obviously there's successful exits on the ASX, but definitely there's a lot of sort of M&A that's taken place. So one of the things we've obviously got our upcoming Venture and Capital conference. We've got Dr. Nicholas as part of that event. I've sort of mentioned that I look at the life science area as being there's $1 trillion transformation taking place. A lot of the technologies that are being used at the moment are sort of 30, 40, 50, 60 plus years old that they've been used. And it's interesting now, the role that, whether it be technological breakthroughs or whether it be the aging demographic, there's effectively, you've got these two different forces that are actually coming together to assist in speeding up different elements of this process, but inside of that, creating a whole bunch of new value. So my final question for you, Andrew, would be, when you're thinking about life science and medical technologies over the next 5 to 10 years, what goes through your mind? Like, what's your sort of personal vision, your personal sort of investment thesis, where you think about how does this all play out over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, look, that's a big question. We talk a lot about human 2.0. So what is the future of humanity and what is the future of a human being? And it's a body complemented and supplemented by devices and procedures and technology and software. So, I'm not necessarily talking about, an Android-esque interconnected human type 2. I'm talking more about...
Elon would be.
Yeah, well, Elon is. I'm talking more about, what's coming to the market now is things like Tasker, Taska. That was a successful exit for Dr. Nicholas Hartnell, who's speaking at the venture coming up, the venture and private capital event coming up. So Tasker effectively has created the world's best bionic hand. If you put a glove on that, you don't even know that that's a bionic hand. Wow. It's waterproof, it's extremely usable and durable, and their technology is getting better and better. It's things like having animal ligaments from a kangaroo inside your joints. So say Sam Kerr tears an ACL again, she gets a bone ligament technology of a kangaroo put into her knee, and she bounces out, literally, 6 times stronger in that joint than she was previously because of how the kangaroo creates its tendon. It's about, depression procedures that, effectively scan the brain, looking for alternative therapies for depression, and that aren't medicated by, focusing lasers, photons, etc., into the brain and stimulating the serotonin receptors. So there's a way to use software, devices, and procedures to create human 2.0. So we look at the landscape and we often say internally, is this human 2.0? If you look at X-ray technology, it's 100 plus years old. Yeah. But there are guys...
I learned that with one of the listed companies we worked with was 4DS, and that was innovation that come out of a university. And, Andreas did an incredible job of, going around raising capital for years and then going and listing that. And yeah, he was the one that really alluded me to how old that technology is.
There's another great business out in New Zealand, which I think is on the Wholesale Investor platform, Mars Bioimaging. They're a phenomenal one to watch. They've created a 3D color X-ray, ultra high definition, and we've invested in them as well. Ultimately, their product is going to change the landscape for imaging. It's phenomenal, and it'll get to a point where they can get the photon technology moving so fast that they'll be able to capture live images of movement as well as just stagnant X-ray-esque images.
We did a panel session recently on immunotherapy. And so it blows me away that the standard of care treatment for someone who's got cancer goes straight to chemotherapy and radiation when there's, when you look at all the different sort of types of immunotherapy solutions that are coming out. So that's where, you use that as an example and you think...
Back pain's the big one. I mean, people don't realize what a large global problem back pain is. But if you speak to anybody, anybody's had a sore back at some point in their lives, and everybody knows somebody who has had a debilitating back injury to the point where the only options you have in back pain are you take opioids or very strong painkillers, and then you move to spinal fusion or some sort of disc locking or implant device, which have I think it's a 70% failure rate on those surgeries. So you spend a lot of money, wasted a lot of time, and you come out often worse than you were going into it. But there's a raft of, regenerative technologies. And I'd probably say the regenerative medicine space is the one to watch. There's a lot of molecules coming out at the moment, like one we've invested into, CBT-005, Cartago. Cartago. Cartago has created a naturally occurring molecule in the human body which gets injected into a soft tissue damage and then causes the stem cells around that to regenerate the damaged cells. So when we talk about complementary investments, one of our strategies is to look at it and say, okay, somebody needs a ligament replaced. We use bone ligament technologies from the kangaroo to implant and replace that damaged ligament. That then becomes a graft that the body's natural collagen grows over the top of, but we can accelerate that repair with an injection of CBT-005. And if we've needed to shave a little bit of the bone off, we have Cetonics, which is a biocomposite material, which is effectively artificial bone, which we can then put in there as well. So just to come back to the what do we invest in and why, we look at complementary technologies that can be used together to effectively create Human 2.0.
Incredible. I love that. And just to finish, I love the concept of the Human 2.0 because you can really see it unfolding in the content, in the breakthroughs that actually are coming out. So I'll finish on that. I just want to say a big thank you to Andrew for coming in today, and also for Dr. Nicholas, who's going to appear at the Venture and Capital event. Make sure you go and check out the SoHi Partners page inside Capital HQ. I said, I've learned so much from just my conversations with Andrew. I love the way they're thinking about it. I love how it's very rare for us that we have someone approach venture when they're thinking about from the 4 different phases you mentioned, from not just the actual, what you're looking to invest into, but also the movement through the different phases that a life science company also goes through. And obviously that's where the investment banking and executive background comes in. So thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Dave.
Look forward to following the journey.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.